Here's a goofy Q&A with William Lane Craig.
The first part of the question is, can you speculate as far as like what is the state of his cognitive faculties right now with respect to his human nature? And is there any drawing of implications that you could look into as far as like what our glorified bodies will allow with respect to our cognitive faculties?
This question is probably based on a response that Craig has given to the passage in the Bible in which Jesus says that he didn't know the day or time of his second coming. If Jesus is a god, he should be all-knowing, which is pretty hard to square with his assertion that he doesn't know something. Craig's explanation is that Jesus' unconscious mind knew, even though that knowledge was inaccessible to his conscious mind, so he's still all-knowing.
It seems to me that we can say that in the incarnate state, that these divine elements were largely confined to Jesus' subliminal, and that his waking consciousness would have been consistent with the experience of an ordinary human being. Though clearly he did have some understanding, as I said, of being God's son, being the Son of Man, having this commission by God, knowing why he had come, and so forth. So there was elements of this divine self-understanding in Jesus' consciousness. But I think we should say that knowledge of things like the date of his return, auto mechanics, quantum mechanics, and things of that sort would be part of the divine subliminal rather than part of his human waking consciousness. And that gets you a genuine incarnation.
This always struck me as a silly response, because if information isn't accessible to your conscious mind, then I don't think you can meaningfully say that you really know it, even if it is in some sense present in your unconscious mind. So this guy asked Craig if Jesus became consciously aware of that information once he ascended into heaven.
All right. With respect to the first, I like the word speculation that you used, because that is what this would be, is to speculate. And theologians have typically differentiated two states of Christ. The state of humiliation, which lasts from the virginal conception through his burial, and then the state of exaltation, which begins with the descent into hell, his resurrection and ascension to the right hand of God. And I could well imagine that in the state of exaltation, the state of ignorance and limitation would end.
State of ignorance? Well, which is it? Did Jesus have knowledge of his second coming in his unconscious mind, or was he ignorant of that knowledge? If he was ignorant, then how could he be said to have been an all-knowing God? Perhaps Craig would say that divine knowledge is stored in some divine part of Jesus and was inaccessible to the human part of Jesus. How do apologists square this with the Chalcedonian Creed, which says that Jesus is not part God and part human, but rather 100% God and simultaneously 100% human? The Chalcedonian Creed itself seems to be self-contradictory. According to desiringgod.org, the creed says that things that are true only of one nature, either Christ's divine nature or human nature, are nonetheless true of the person of Christ. If this is the case, then since divine nature is omniscient, Jesus is omniscient. But it's also the case that since human nature is not omniscient, Jesus is not omniscient. Now you may respond that his divine nature is omniscient, but his human nature isn't, but the creed seems to be saying that anything true of one of Jesus's natures is true of Jesus's person, which consists of both natures. Since the two natures seem to have contradictory properties, this seems to lead inescapably to the conclusion that the person of Jesus has contradictory properties. How the fuck does that make any sense? I don't know if you've heard, but I do have a Patreon.